It's a new day, a new year, and by me, we're starting it off with a -5-degree day and -20 wind chill, so. Happy New Year, everybody! It's a new year, it's a new day, it's a new month, it's a new everything, and it's that time of year when everybody kind of takes a look at their life again and goes, how do I want to improve myself? How do I want to work on things, you know? How do I want to do better on stuff, you know? That kind of inspired me because I like doing these education type videos. I think I get a lot of good feedback from them, and I like giving people advice where I feel like I can help and give advice. And so today I kind of wanted to talk about one big tip that I feel like if your goal for the new year, if you're kind of into the whole New Year's resolution, or maybe you're not watching this at the beginning of the year, you're watching this at some other point of the year, but you've kind of made a decision with yourself, I'm gonna get better at my musical skills, and I want to figure out how. I wanted to give one really big tip that I felt was very important to people who are kind of looking to advance their musical skills and may feel like they're kind of in a little bit of a rut and don't know how to get out of that or how to go about fixing it, particularly if you're self-taught in your playing skills, as a lot of musicians tend to be nowadays with the advent of the internet and being able to look up YouTube videos to learn how to play an instrument. Now, this title isn't clickbaity, it is one tip and it is pretty useful, but I will make a little disclaimer here to say that this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of tip. There is some caveats that I do have to preface this with and say, like, it's not like it's a magic fix that's gonna fix everything, as I'll get to in a second. But the one thing I really wanted to sit down and address and talk about how you can work on today is this idea of musicality. Now, you've probably heard that term before. If you've ever been like in a competition where they're judging you on various aspects of your playing, you've probably heard the term musicality before. It's a commonly thrown about term, but it's often very vague and super under talked about. So I'm gonna spend some time today kind of describing a little bit what that is and how you can accomplish it. So what is musicality specifically? Well, I think the easiest way to describe it is to kind of talk about maybe more so what it isn't. So musicality is usually kind of tricky to describe because it is a very abstract idea, and it's also super subjective too, compared to something more concrete, as in I want to work on my physical technicalities, you know, and like my fingerings. Oh, I did violin. That's also the wrong hand. But like my fingerings or my breathing techniques, that's more physical techniques, or saying things like, oh, work on your dynamics. That's pretty measurable. Musicality tends to sort of be talked about, but it's very hard to nail down exactly what it is. But you may be somewhat familiar with this concept if you've ever heard maybe your own performance or somebody else's performance where you've listened to it and you've gone, I feel like they've done everything right, they've checked off all the boxes, but something's still missing. That's typically sort of a lack of musicality, or at least a diminished sense of musicality. Musicality, I would describe, is the overall sound and feeling of a piece, usually in the pleasant kind of way. For an example, if you've ever listened to somebody play and you can tell that they're very technically correct, but it might sound very robotic, that might be a lack of musicality. On the flip side, if you've heard somebody play something, maybe they're not the most technically correct, but they have a lot of feeling and energy and life put into the piece. That is more of a sense of musicality. It's very difficult to nail down sometimes, but having that ability to be able to add more musicality to your piece can really help elevate your playing to that next level. But keep in mind, it is a skill like all other skills of music playing that all performers should have in some way. But it's not the first one you should go for. So if you're watching this video and you're thinking to yourself, wow, I think I might need to do that in my playing, make sure that you've done all the other big important stuff first. Working on musicality is detail work when it comes to polishing up a piece. It's some of the last steps you should be taking. It's kind of like if we're carving a sculpture. You don't want to work on the details of the face if you haven't even got the head shape in place. That's what musicality is. It's the detail work. So make sure you've got the much bigger technical issues out of the way, because musicality is not going to be an easy fix button. It's not going to come in there and fix everything if you've still got issues with dynamics or articulations, or if your overall playthrough isn't smooth because you're still working on reading the actual notes. Don't add musicality in yet. Do that more towards the end. But if you have a lot of the other stuff most of the way taken care of and you feel like you're ready to take on this step of musicality and like developing it and working on it, what should you look for and how should you go about improving this skill? Well, it mostly comes down to what is this? I'm like conducting an orchestra here. Well, it mostly comes down to listening skills. Musicality is all about listening, which is sort of why it's really difficult to nail down and it's so abstract. It's not about something you can see, it's not about something you can physically do, it's about the listening and this overall sound of it. So in order to develop musicality, you really need to focus on your own personal listening skills. And if you're not super experienced with your own listening skills, it can be really hard to do, especially in the moment while you're playing. So my first recommendation to somebody who's never worked on their musicality before and is trying it out for the first time and is developing their listening skills is to record yourself playing. Now, I know, trust me, I know how that feels. For beginners who have never recorded themselves playing, the first initial thought is always like, oh my gosh, no, I can't do this, I can't stand to watch myself. No, you don't understand, I can't stand to listen to myself. Okay, look at me, I know, trust me, I know. I make YouTube videos now and I have gotten much more comfortable with myself, but like not even like maybe 5-6 years ago, I could not, absolutely under no circumstance, could not watch myself. I could not listen to my own voice. I could not listen to my own performance. It was the most cringeworthy thing I could possibly imagine for myself. So trust me, I know, I've been there. But also believe me when I say that practicing it over and over and over again and really forcing yourself through that cringiness and that uncomfortableness, you will get there and it will be far less painful the more often you do it. Plus, I would also say that if it may be one specific element. For example, if you think of recording yourself as doing it on video and you just can't stand to watch your own face or body language, since you're not focused on things like physical aspect, you're focusing on the listening part of it, maybe don't do video, do audio instead and take that element out so it makes it easier for you to listen to. If you don't have audio recorder and you only have a video recorder for some reason, then maybe just don't watch it, just listen to it in the background. And you don't have to do a perfect performance either. Don't worry about making this a super flawless performance. The point here is not to analyze how perfectly you played something. It's to listen to the overall effect and sound. So do a couple takes if you need to, just to get yourself comfortable. And don't worry about making a few mistakes in your recording. This is not something you're submitting to a judge for. This is just for you to listen to you. So once you've done that, then go back and listen to it. But while you listen to it, actively listen to it and write things down that you notice. So actively listen to it, not passively listening to it. So that means like making sure your entire focus is on the music that's playing, on your recording, and you're not doing something else in the background. Have a pencil and paper, or I mean, if you really want to, you can just type it out, but have something to write down while you're listening, every little thing that you notice. So number one, make sure you're only focusing on musicality. If you try to focus on every little thing that you feel like you did wrong all at once, it's going to be overwhelming and you're going to lose focus of what you're trying to do here. So only focus on the overall sound and the overall effect and the overall just pleasantness of the piece, and write down things that you feel like you did really well on, and things you wish could be a little bit better. And both of those are important. Yes, we often like to criticize ourselves and say, what can I have done better on? But it's also just as important to write down the things that you feel like you did well on, so you can compare that against the things you feel like you could do better on, to say, I feel like I did well here, and I feel like this could be better because I want it to be more like this. It's not just there to make yourself feel better, although that is a nice plus. You do want to have something to compare against to know how you can improve it. So when you're writing things down and when you're describing things, you may feel a little bit lost as to, well, how do I describe something that's really abstract? And it may take a little bit of practice, but really take your time to just come up with some kind of language to describe things. It doesn't have to make sense. It only has to make sense to you, because you're the only one reading this, you're the only one listening to this. So just use whatever comes to your mind. Does your music sound robotic? Does it sound stiff? Is it too soupy in some areas? Is it really kind of frazzled in other areas? Any kind of adjective honestly works. I mean, heck, even think about like professional. I mean, how often do we use color to describe music? There's no color in music. It's sound. It's not visual. And yet we all know what we're kind of talking about when we say, oh, music has this sort of color to it. So just use your own language. The big deal is not, did you describe this in a way that anybody else could understand? And more so, did you describe this in a way that you know what you're talking about? So once you've done that, once you have all your notes, once you've listened to it and you kind of know what you're listening for, then go back and reperform the piece and listen to those elements that you wrote down and that you identified, and listen for them while you play it again. Try to recognize them in the moment. Try to identify them as they come up. If you know, like at this measure, I had something that I didn't like how I did it at one time, go back and try to listen as you're playing to see how you can fix that. Don't feel free to go back and adjust and play around with things as you practice anything else, and mess around with it until you can listen to it in the moment. You might not get there on the second try once you play it through that second time. You may have to re-record yourself, go through it again, write down things. It's gonna take some time to develop that ability to really listen to it while you're playing in the moment. And even then, honestly, I would still say, like, for people like myself who have been doing this for years and years, it's still a good idea to record yourself every now and then, because you're inevitably going to miss something that you can't catch while you're focused on a billion other things. But this is only half of the equation, because so far, if you've only just listened to yourself and tried to improve yourself against yourself, you're not gonna get anywhere higher, because you're only looking at yourself. You don't know where to go from here. So the second half of this is to go out and listen to professional recordings of the piece you're trying to perform, if you can find it. I mean, if you're playing some kind of like specific video game music and you're playing an arrangement for your instrument, you might not find an exact recording of that. But like if you're playing classical music, more often than not, you're going to find some kind of professional recording. Now, I say professional specifically to kind of make a note here. It's not that amateur recordings are bad, but sometimes amateur recordings can have different elements that aren't super helpful to a beginning musician or somebody who's beginning to work on this skill. So if you're not really well versed in listening to good musicality, if you're not really well versed in your listening skills, I would advise to initially to steer clear of amateur recordings for a while, because if you don't know how to vet good recordings versus bad recordings, you're not going to know what not to listen for. And generally 9 times out of 10, the professional recordings are pretty safe to go with. However, with that doesn't mean you're going to like every single professional recording you come across. So in one way or another, you're always going to have to vet your recordings. You're going to have to sit down and listen to it and go, is this good? Is this not good? Is this what I want my own sound to sound like? Or is this not at all what I want it to sound like? Because that's a valid criticism too. Like I said, musicality is very subjective. So you may like how one person performed a particular passage, and then like listen to another person's performance of the same exact piece and go, oh my gosh, it's so different. I don't like that at all. I can't stand how they did something. And you may not want to use that, even though it is still a professional recording. As you develop the skill more, it's more okay to listen to amateur recordings of it, but you should still be careful as to which ones you're using as a reference, because if there's still certain elements, like maybe they're really stiff in one area, you don't want to be taking elements from other musicians that have more things that are a little bit more objectively wrong, or at the very least are not very helpful to you as you're trying to learn. If you're going to use recordings as a reference point and a way to help improve your skills, you should really always try to find ones that are performed by musicians who are at or above your current skill level. Then, once you found a recording that you really like, start to use that as a reference point to compare your own performance against. Now, I know we don't often like to say to like, don't compare yourself to other people because you're different than what they are. And that is true. That is absolutely true. Don't ignore that advice. However, comparing yourself against others can still be a very helpful tool if you use it in the right way. You're not comparing yourself against somebody else saying, oh, I'm not as good as them. That's not the goal here. You're comparing yourself against someone who has more ability than you and saying to yourself, how can I improve my own skills and my own abilities to be more like this person that I want to emulate? So just like you did with your own recordings, actively listen to these professional recordings and write down things that you notice, things that you like, and also things that you don't really care for, that you hear and listen to in the piece. Write down things that you want to emulate, and also write down things that you kind of want to avoid. Not every recording is going to be perfect. There are going to be some performances by certain people that you can't stand, but maybe you like one small element of what they did somewhere. Maybe most of the performance was really good, but they did something weird at this one measure mark that you're just like, I don't want to do that. And don't just use one recording. Use multiple recordings, because you want to pick and choose from a lot of different people to use in your own playing in your own style. It's very rare that you'll find one singular person that has everything you could possibly want in their performance. It's much more likely that you're going to have to listen to a handful of people and to pick and choose from various elements of what you liked and what you didn't like to kind of incorporate into your own playing. And of course, like I was talking about, when you listen to your own performance, don't listen to everything. You're just focusing on the musicality, the overall sound, the overall pleasantness of it. Describe the color, describe the timbre, describe the emotion, describe the feeling, describe all of those abstract thoughts that come with music. Give them more concrete descriptors and write it down so that you have some more, at least somewhat concrete feeling thoughts. And it's not just up in space and indescribable, because then you're going to want to turn around and take that again back to your own playing. You have all your notes from the professional recordings of things that you really want to emulate. Don't worry about doing this, emulating others' performances, and thinking that you're in some way copying exactly what they do. Because firstly, it's highly unlikely that you will exactly replicate someone else's performance, because you're a completely different person and you have completely different quirks and completely different ways of doing things. So it's highly unlikely that you copy someone else's performance in the first place. But secondly, if you had been listening to multiple recordings, you probably got multiple influences and you're going to mix those all together. So you're not copying other people, you're using elements, imitating them, and creating something new. And thirdly, imitation is exactly how you start to create your own style. And that's a part of what musicality is. It's the overall sound, overall effect, overall pleasantness of making it sound more lifelike and more like music. And that element is a musician's style. Compare it to like art, where if you see an artist draw something, you can see the particular styles that they have. It's much easier to describe that because you can visually see it. But musicians do the same thing. That's in the musicality. We don't have an drawing art style, but we have a musicality music style where the way we play things is our very own special technique and twist on things. So when you're starting this whole process of working on your musicality, you're working on developing your own sense of style. And the beginning steps of that has a lot to do with imitation. Imitation of things that you like and incorporating them in is not copying someone. That's the starting steps of creating your own style. Because it's from there that you can take it out and make variations on the things you imitated and start to twist it into your own special, unique flares. And so, yeah, I hope I described that in a way that was somewhat understandable. I know I didn't really talk in very concrete terms because this is a very abstract subject, but I hope that if you felt like you wanted to elevate your playing, you felt like you were missing something in your performance, and you really wanted to find what that one little element was that you felt like was missing, I hope that I helped give you a direction into taking that next step in your music playing skills. It's not one that I see a ton of people work on too often, because especially if you've ever had music lessons, so much of the lessons are so heavily focused on the technicality of things and getting through the actual difficult, like playing the piece aspects of it, but musicality is often overlooked. So I felt like we should take some time today to appreciate musicality and the loveliness that it gives us in our pieces, because honestly, music would not feel quite as nice without it. So yeah, but that's all I had for today. So if you like this video and you'd like to see more of it, feel free to subscribe to the channel. And otherwise, I will see you next time. Goodbye!